Online retailer Amazon has struggled to deal with retailers hawking questionable Nazi glorifying merchandise, and a recent Anti Defamation League survey found that almost 1 in 10 Americans who play online multiplayer games are exposed to discussions about Holocaust denial. If the tech industry is going to address this problem, it needs to fully recognize a basic reality. Holocaust denial is anti Semitism and therefore hate speech. Unfortunately, Facebook, the largest social media platform on the planet, just can't seem to get there. With online hate speech and white supremacy demonstrably leading to violent acts, the history of the Holocaust must be preserved and respected. Social media companies can play a unique role by adopting policies that explicitly forbid Holocaust denial. It's time for these companies to step up. Well, these companies, of course, it is a free country, and these companies are free to do pretty much whatever they want to within the confines of libel and slander law. But this whole idea of hate speech is scary. Because, once you start down that road, you say, well, if it's hate speech, then we are going to bring a lot of pressure to bear on communications media to ban hate speech. And who's going to decide what hate speech is? I can decide for myself. If I plug into my computer and I'm looking for something and I stumble across something I don't like, I don't look at it. I don't need anybody to come along and clean up the cyber waves for me. And the scary thing is this, that we've seen what's happened in universities where people who are of a conservative bent are harassed and harried and chased off campuses and forbidden for speaking because they engage in hate speech. Now, I'm going to use a little hate speech right here. Tall tales. In Tall Tales, we don't get into this whole hate speech thing. Speech is speech. Speech has a power to persuade. It has a power to motivate. And if speech is bad, if some speech is bad, then the antidote is more speech, not censorship. So I'm going to engage in a little hate speech right now. I believe that marriage means a relationship between one man and one woman devoted to the propagation of the human race, having children, and that only the complementarity of a man and a woman can produce a child, and that if a person is born a man, no matter what surgical mutilation he undergoes, he's always going to be a man. Now, there are some people, I got a feeling not very many of them are part of my international radio listening audience, but there are some people that say, oh, that's hate speech. That's hate speech. And once we start down this slippery slope of saying, we're going to make sure that we silence those who are engaging in hate speech, we have a problem that's 15,000 times greater than any that could be created by the most egregious form of hate speech. And of course, that's one reason that we start this program. Weans. I start this program every day with the Second Amendment, because we have a Bill of Rights. Individual rights are protected only so long as all of us take it upon himself, herself. Oh, thank you, Real Joe Cruz. Real Joe, I can read lips. And I saw the Real Joe Cruz there saying themselves. If all of us engage in protecting those rights that are listed so clearly in the First Amendment, then we'll be able to hang on to them. But if you're paying attention to stuff like Jonathan Greenblatt, I agree with Jonathan Greenblatt's basic point. This whole Holocaust denial thing is a crock of, I'm not going to use the right word here, it's a crock. And it's often advanced by people who have evil motives. But I don't see shutting down communications media on the basis that that's hate speech. I see that as a really serious problem. Okay, now that I've got the internet back, I'm going to go back to that post by Ishmael Velez. I'm taking it out of order, but I like it so well that I'm going to give it a shot right now. Tina Munya Barnes resolution number 255, Guam's application to the Unrepresented Nations and Peoples Organization, UNPO, is for all intended purposes a crock of chicken dung. Let me go back here. Let's see.
Just so you know, sir, we're on live.
Right. For starters, the purpose of UNPO is to empower the voices of unrepresented people in order to protect their fundamental human rights. When reading about UNPO, it is written that it was conceived by exile leaders of people living under communist oppression. So let me see if I understand. People who are exiled from or living under communist oppression are all intended purposes. They are free people no longer living under communist oppression. So they were exiled and decided to conceive UNPO so they can go back to living under communist oppression. As far as unrepresented people, isn't Guamanians being represented under the flag of the United States of America? As far as protection of their fundamental human rights, doesn't the Bill of Rights and the Constitution grant these already and not mentioned in the Organic Act? Have friends who should see this video, share it with them so they can watch us. They can watch too. That's from Ishmael Velez. I'm going to put this on the card tomorrow. I read it in passing, and it's one of those things where, you read it and say, oh, wow, what next? And I didn't pay as much attention to it as I should have. Unrepresented people. When we have a person who sits on the floor of the House of Representatives and now even has a vote. Yeah, I know, but, tomorrow self-determination, and we can't vote for president. And that same old separatist story. So if Tina wants to be a separatist, we'll take her up on it, and we'll brand her Tina the Separatist, and we'll make sure that when the next election comes up, we'll give credit where credit is due. Okay, so much for the editorial in the Daily News. And now for the Post. What the heck? Let's take our break, Real Joe Cruz, just like our Facebook did.
The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts of Guam Training.
Customer service isn't rocket science, but sometimes you need patience that's otherworldly to get through the day. I'm Jerry Roberts, and at 7:20 a.m. on The Ray Gibson Show, we'll tell a few stories where the service was on the unique side.
You can find daily transcripts of The Extra Point at guamtraining.com. Tune in every weekday morning at 7:20 for The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts, brought to you by Guahan Insurance Services and First Hawaiian Bank on 93.3 The Point.
Half a day, I'm Governor Lou Leon Guerrero.
And I'm Lieutenant Governor Joshua Tenorio.
If you survived the Japanese occupation during World War II, filed a claim under the World War II Loyalty Recognition Act, and received a letter from the Foreign Claims Settlement Commission saying you are entitled to receive monetary compensation, then you may have an adjudicated claim.
Bring your claim letter and a valid government ID to our Guam War Claims Processing Center at the old Hakubotan building in Tamuning, Mondays to Fridays from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m., and we will help you process your claim. If you have any questions or would like to know more, call us at 472-8931 or visit our website at warclaims.guam.gov.
Getting to this point wasn't easy, and our work isn't over. But we are now beginning to heal old wounds and honor our greatest generation. And we say to those still alive to hear it, your long wait is over.
The UOG Endowment Foundation presents How to Say I Love You, Love Languages in the Pacific, Thursday, February 13th at the Guam Museum from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. $60 per person includes cultural delicacies, free-flowing drinks, and live entertainment. Love Languages in the Pacific will benefit the liberal arts and fine arts programs.
We now return to Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie, soaring over the confusion with his superpowers of truth. Call 888-TALK. That's 888-8255.
So I'm looking here at WhatsApp. It says there were 2 Bobs in the screen for a while.
Yes, sir, there was.
That would be what we call a double header, I guess.
Yeah.
Can we do that again?
I think that was a mistake, sir.
Well, you know,
I don't know if the world can handle 2 Bobs, sir.
Yeah, good point, real Joe Cruz. You know, I'm really not that vain. I'm just always really concerned about how I look.
Yeah, I understand.
And if I look really nice, then 2 would be better than 1, right?
This is true.
Yeah. And then you also said that for a while the a bank ad was showing over my face.
I don't know. An ad was showing.
Yeah.
Yeah, don't worry.
Some kind of sabotage from the competition, no doubt.
Probably.
Yeah. Okay, so then we have the Post, and Post disappoints today. Post, you could have taken this and cut it in half and put a black border around it and put the words attention in bold, all caps in the middle of it, because it's just an announcement. That's all it is. Stay informed, but only trust reputable sources on new coronavirus. Guam public health officials last week said Guam faces a low risk of getting an outbreak of the new coronavirus, but also cautioned the situation is evolving and could change at any moment. There were no suspected or confirmed cases of coronavirus in Guam or the Northern Marianas. They issued a clarification after unverified information circulated on social media on Monday that Saipan has a case of coronavirus, and it was later proven to be false. Really a bad sentence there, Post. It's a run-on sentence. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. What does the "it" refer to? They issued a clarification after unverified information circulated on social media Monday that Saipan has a case of coronavirus, and it was later proven to be false. What was proven to be false? The case of coronavirus? Saipan? The unverified information? That's what you get when you use run-on sentences. And then they go on to say, we do need to be alert, and there are 1,000 cases in China, and the pneumonia-like disease has killed 56 people. We get it. We know that. We've seen that in a million other news sources, Post. There is no cure specific to the new corona. Yeah, we know that too. And although there are no reported or suspected confirmed cases on Guam, the community is advised to practice the same efforts that would prevent the spread of influenza or any other respiratory illness. These include, according to public health, and then that whole laundry list, like wash your hands, stay home from school if you're sick. This is not an editorial, not even close to an editorial. They could have perhaps written an editorial dealing with the role of social media vis-a-vis the print media or the electronic media, but they didn't do that. What they have here is basically a public service announcement. No Blue Star Today, Post. I guess they're not going to feel too bad because they've already gotten 172 blue stars. So what's one more blue star, more or less? Okay, so from there, we go on to the card for January 28, 2020. And this is what I've got on the card. Lou and Tina versus Michael San Nicolas. This is never going to stop, right? And then I've got social justice warrior Mary Torres versus private property, Bill 214. And another one that really has legs, Pacell versus Munya Brecht and Rudy Paco. And then I've got Eric Miller versus Race Judicata. Eric Miller is the administrative law judge at the Civil Service Commission, and you'll want to have your Law and Order notebooks handy when I explain what race judicata means. It's a very nice addition to your vocabulary. And then I've got Pedo versus the Post, the hoax of racism versus common sense. I've got Titano versus Casil. And by the way, if you haven't tuned in lately, I've invented a way of expressing a punctuation mark, and that is the parenthesis sign. So if I have to read a parenthesis sign, rather than saying a parenthesis, blah, 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 close parenthesis, I just say, that means open parenthesis, and means close parenthesis. So we have one senator who has incorporated the parenthesis into her name. And I've seen a lot of different kinds of names. You know, we have names that have where there is a period in the name, like St. George or St. John or something like that. I've seen that. I've seen people with hyphenated names like Ken, Leon Guerrero. So I've seen hyphens in people's names. I don't think I've ever seen a comma or an explanation mark. And I've never seen anyone's name that had a parenthesis in it. That is until the election of Kelly Marsh Titano. So whenever you see your name in print, you'll see the word, after the word Marsh, you'll see the word Titano in parentheses. It's a parenthetical phrase. So I just use that sound just because it's easier than saying the word over and over again. So this item on the card is Titano versus, Titano versus Casil. And then I've got Chief Ignacio versus Public Safety, Tall Tales versus the Hell No group, and Robert Underwood versus Us, plus Marsh and Punzelon. And Real Joe Cruz, you remember this one. This was about Robert Underwood's spirited defense of spending over $300,000 to send 100 folks to Hawaii. Robert saw it as necessary to protect identity. It's kind of like that Rush Limbaugh ad, I guess, that we hear all the time, right? Identity theft. So Robert Underwood says we got to do this festback thing to find out who we are. And then I've got the Pope versus Trump and Antonio Gramsci versus Y'all, which these have been on the card for quite a while. So we'll start out with Lou and Tina versus Michael San Nicolas. I understand that after Saturday, the media opportunities trailed off quite nicely. So there aren't that many good photo shoots for Lou anymore. Not so many opportunities to do virtue signaling. Lou, I've always been for the Manamku. I've been fighting for the Manamku all my life. Or righteousness preening. You know, it's only right that we finally address the needs of the Manamku. she's lost her platform for that. But I guess thanks to Mike and Nicholas, she remains in the spotlight. So here's an article from the Post, as Daily News. As Guam processes World War II survivors' war claims, petitioners want Congress to reopen filing window. And hundreds have signed an ongoing petition asking Congress to reopen the period for World War II survivors and their families to war claims, even as hundreds who were able to file claims in 2017 and 2018 could start getting advance compensation this week under a local $14 million program. The Foreign Claims Settlement Commission received more than 3,650 claims from Guam war survivors between June 27 and June 20 filing period. Those who suffered rape, injury, etc. during the Japanese occupation or whose parents were killed are eligible to receive $10,000 to $25,000, etc. But petitioners said many others, including those who lived throughout the United States, missed the one-year filing period and want to be given an opportunity to file claims. And then we have a quote here from the petitioners. This brief period is significantly shorter than any other claims adjudicated by the Foreign Claims Settlement Commission, which on average held their claims program open for a decade, the petitioner said. So here we go now. We're going to find another group of the oppressed, the victims. And then, initiated by Speaker Tina Rose Munya-Barnes, the petition seeks Congress to amend the 2016 federal law to give more survivors additional time to file claims if they miss the 2017-2018 filing period. So let me just stop here and say it again in my own words. What Tina is saying is that there are people who lived through the Japanese occupation who didn't file claims with the Foreign Claims Settlement Commission before the deadline, before the window closed, before the time expired. And they apparently didn't say boo about it. I hadn't heard anything about it until Lou's public relations extravaganza started over at the Hekabotan building. And then apparently a few, many, hundreds, thousands of these people come forward and say, I didn't know about that, so I never sent in a claim. Could I send in a claim now? And who comes to the rescue, Real Joe Cruz?
Who, sir?
Well, it wasn't Captain Marvel. It wasn't Spider-Man. It wasn't Wonder Woman.
It wasn't Chicks from Chicks Motors.
It was not. It was not Chicks hitting as retros to get back to that big sale we were having down in Tamuning. No, it was none of those folks. It was Tina Rose Munya-Barnes.
Nice.
Yeah, who happens to be on island right now. Small world, isn't it? And Tina started circulating this petition. And Tina has said, I'm going to use all of my efforts to make sure that everyone who suffered through that occupation is compensated. So Tina once again comes out as the champion. And then the petition, which I'm assuming was drafted by Tina or her minions, these foreign claims were given an additional extended application period. What more should that consideration be given by the U.S. federal government to people of Guam or U.S. citizens? The Speaker's office continues to circulate the petition sheets, which are also available at the Guam War Claims Processing Center. So once again, now Tina is able to assume the role of champion. So even if what she does doesn't get anywhere, I have to have really long odds to bet that she's going to get anywhere with this, to go to Congress now and say, thanks a lot because you freed up some of this money, which actually is kind of your money, it's federal taxes, and you did this whole war claims thing, and over 3,000 people have submitted papers, but now we want to do it again because some people didn't know about it. How well do you think that's going to fly at the U.S. Congress? I got a feeling this is not going to work out very well. However, once again, if we examine it from the standpoint of winners and losers, who wins? Tina, the populist leader fighting for the little guy. Or the little girl, well, them anyhow. And who stands to lose? Mike San Nicolas. He didn't get it for the folks that missed the deadline. He probably doesn't even care. So nice going, you guys. I mean, you're playing this whole war claims thing for a maximum number of tricks. You turned it into a bridge game. See who could get the most tricks. So then, there's a little bit more to it than that. This is from Michael San Nicolas. Delegate San Nicolas is claiming the War Claims Processing Center that opened Friday has issued slips of paper to constituents advising them to contact him to expedite their reparations. San Nicolas said this is nothing he is able to do. We have no ability to expedite war claims processing, and the governor knows this, San Nicolas stated through a press release. It's actually pretty incredible that they're so willing to mislead the people in order to plow forward and save face rather than just be honest and admit their process didn't include everyone. The governor's liaison is the author that created the process, so they are fully aware that sending people to me to expedite them is actually just misleading them. San Nicolas was referring to former Delegate Madeline Berdaglio, who is the governor's liaison in Washington, D.C. Okay, and then the governor comes back, once again, keeping that ball bouncing. The governor's office stated San Nicolas' claim is untrue. It is true, however, that many of our Manamku missed the federal deadline to file a claim under the World War II Loyalty Recognition Act. Reopening the window that requires an act of Congress, as you were reopening that window requires an act of Congress, and survivors and their families have asked how to contact the delegate's office. The processing center is directing these constituents to contact the delegate, as well as Tina Rose Munya Barnes, who is compiling a petition. The slips of paper referred to by the delegate has both his and Barnes' contact information, said Carlo Branch, Director of Policy, and now head spin doctor at ADLU. Whether or not we have a congressman willing, listen to this, whether or not we have a congressman willing to reopen the war claims window is a question no one can answer but him. So pretty well crafted. Let's take a short break and I'll come back and finish this one up.
Now here's Bob in the traffic chopper. What's up, Bob?
Traffic's at a standstill right now with a guy standing in the middle of the street holding a sign. Let me zoom in. The sign says, free the fence.
Free the fence. And what does that mean, Bob?
Not sure, but the guy's out there smiling and waving in short shorts with a weird-looking little hat. He's got a sign in one hand and what looks like, is it? What? It is. It's a bottle of beer in the other.
Oh no, that's Ray.
Free the fences in your mind with The Ray Gibson Show. Weekday mornings from 6 to 10 on 93.3 The Point.
Chili's 2 for $25 is back. Start with an appetizer to share. Then choose 2 entrees like our mouth-watering old-timer with cheeseburger or the Cajun chicken pasta, grilled chicken with penne and Alfredo sauce, and chili spices. Feeling extra? Upgrade to a personal fajita or our famous half-rack ribs. Bring a friend or a date to Chili's and get 2 entrees for $25. Located on the 2nd floor of Tumon Sands Plaza. Chili's. More life happens here.
Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie is brought to you by Bank Pacific, banking on the Pacific for 65 years.
Yeah, so we're coming back here, and Ishmael Velez, referring to your comment, when I said it makes no sense, I was not saying that your post made no sense. Your post made perfect sense. What didn't make sense is Tina Rose's champion of our getting into UNPO, the Unrepresented People's Organization. So for you, it was a good post, so good that I'm going to pick it up and put it on the card tomorrow. And then with respect to what I just went through here with the latest bickering between the executive and Michael San Nicolas, Jose hits the nail right on the head. Seems that when questions are too much and the process gets too complicated, the administration is telling those who cannot have their claims fulfilled to go see Representative San Nicolas. And that's exactly right. So people come down, you know, now that the checks are actually going out, people who didn't file all of a sudden know all about it. And now they're going down to the Hackabotan, and they're being greeted by very friendly, open people who are there to just help them every way they can. And when people say, I didn't file because I didn't know anything about it, what should I do? You give them a piece of paper and you say, you know, if it were up to me, I'd really like to help you. But this is going to take an act of Congress. So this is up to Representative San Nicolas. Here's his phone number. And also, you know, somebody here on Guam is helping out too. That's Tina Rose Munya Barnes, the speaker. She is circulating, she can't do it, but she's circulating a petition that she can send to that lazy, no good, good for nothing San Nicolas, who will do nothing but disappoint you.
How dare he?
How dare he? Yeah. You know, we ought to send San Nicolas a picture, a pin-up picture of Greta Thunberg. How dare he? So, you know, it's working really well for them. So you send the really tough stuff is probably impossible. Send it off to San Nicolas, so he'll get the blame because he didn't do anything. But in the meantime, the glad handing and the circulating of the petition and the commiserating and the virtue signaling, oh, I feel so bad. That's just not fair that they wouldn't let you file a claim too because you suffered so much. I don't know. I know what we could do. That'll take an act of Congress. You'll have to work with Michael San Nicolas on that. Yeah, I know what he's like, but it's all I can tell you right now. Except Tina Rose Munya Barnes, who's really a nice person, is collecting petitions to send off to Mike, too. All very clear, and it's all going to work very, very well. And we're going to hear about this for quite a while down the road, my suspicion. All right. So next item on the card, we have social justice warrior Mary Torres versus private property. Now, Mary Torres ran as a Republican and was elected handily as a Republican. And we don't usually expect to find that many social justice warriors in the ranks of the Republicans. You usually find social justice warriors not only in the Democrat Party, but over there in the left end of the Democrat Party. I'm thinking of, like, say, the Squad, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and that great American patriot, Rashida Tlaib, the Democrat who represents Palestine in Congress, and Ayanna Pressley, and, Ilhan Omar. Just wondering what happens in Minnesota. I've mentioned this before. You know, Minnesota, Jesse Ventura, Al Franken, Ilhan Omar, going way back, Harold Stassen. They must have some strange criteria for electing people up there in Minnesota, judging by the results that they get. And no, Pierre, I'm not talking about what Jesse Ventura did. I'm talking about Minnesota. Okay, so here's a story that ran in KOM, not today, but yesterday. The Guam Safe Housing Act. Now, who could be against safe housing? We all want safe housing. The Guam Safe Housing Act is one step closer to becoming law, as the Senate Committee on General Government Operations, Appropriations, and Housing is anxious for its passage. This is Bill 214-35 that was introduced by Senator Mary Camacho Torres, is an additional section to the Guam Landlord and Tenant Rental Act. Senator Torres said it provides a safety valve for victims of family violence, sexual assault, or stalking, as it allows the victims to end a lease agreement early without being penalized. It addresses a problem that victims often have when they are in abusive relationships and can't get out of a situation with housing, either because they are locked into a rental agreement or they just don't have options. You know, they're afraid of financial ramifications, Senator Torres said. All right, let's break for that big halftime show we'll always have here on Tall Tales, and I'm going to come back to Mary, the social justice warrior versus private property.
The Point is KUSG, Hagåtña, Guam, 93.3 FM and 104.3 HD3.
One more day for oral arguments. I'm Jack Callahan, Fox News. The president's legal team telling the Senate impeachment trial on Monday the articles of impeachment brought by the House are legally deficient and unconstitutional. Former independent counsel Ken Starr.
Instead of a once-in-a-century phenomenon, which it had been, presidential impeachment has become a weapon to be wielded against one's political opponent.
One more day of defense presentations scheduled on Tuesday. They're not expected to take all of the remaining time allotted. A source telling Fox News everyone should be able to go home for dinner. A question and answer session would start on Wednesday. The New York Times, quoting an unnamed source, claiming that former National Security Advisor John Bolton's new book, which is due out in March, will claim the president did condition military aid to Ukraine on an investigation into the Bidens. That's fueling new calls for witness testimony.
We want Bolton. We want Mulvaney. They heard from the president himself.
Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, but the president calling those claims false.
Nothing was ever said to John Bolton.
And now a statement from the Justice Department that says the Times account of a conversation between Bolton and Attorney General William Barr grossly mischaracterizes what the Attorney General and Bolton discussed. The Supreme Court ruling on Monday, the Trump administration can, at least for now, enforce new restrictions that would block immigrants from entering the country if it's believed they will be reliant on public assistance, things like food stamps and housing vouchers. The case will later be argued on its merits. A California inmate's been charged with killing 5 of his children one at a time when they were infants between 1992 and 2001. The body of one infant found in 2007 finally linked to 57-year-old Paul Perez by DNA testing. America is listening to Fox News.
Mescla Tomorrow Fusion Bistro in the Grand Plaza Hotel in Tumon is now introducing an at-table all-you-can-eat breakfast menu from 7 a.m. to 11 a.m. every Saturday and 7 a.m. to 2 p.m. every Sunday. Enjoy some quality time with your friends and family with some of your favorite local cuisine, from their waffle, hotcakes, and French toast station to their eggs and omelet station and a variety of scrumptious desserts. Weekends at Mescla Bistro in the Grand Plaza Hotel just got hotter. New year, new menu. Call 969-2652 for reservations. Some restrictions apply.
Yikes, are those Christmas bills coming in already? Those high-interest credit cards at 16, 18, even 24%? Well, we have a New Year's solution for you. A Bank Pacific personal loan with rates as low as 4.65% to pay off those expensive credit cards. It's easy, it's fast, and it's as low as 4.65% APR.
Bank Pacific, where others put branches, we place roots.
Equal credit opportunity lender as low as 4.65%. Conditions apply.
President Trump will unveil his long-awaited Mideast peace plan at noon on Tuesday.
It's a very big plan. It will be a suggestion between Israel and the Palestinians. It's the closest it's ever come, and we'll see what happens. We have the support of the Prime Minister. We have the support of the other parties. And we think we will ultimately have the support of the Palestinians, but we're going to see.
The president Monday laid out the plan for Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the country's opposition leader Benny Gantz. China still struggling to contain the coronavirus.
The virus in China has so far sickened over 4,500 people and killed 106. Wuhan, with a population of 11 million, is currently under lockdown, but some health experts say that could be making things worse, saying there is little evidence that quarantines are effective, and this one might have been implemented too late. While the virus seems to be getting worse in China, it's important to note that the CDC says the risk to the general American public remains low. But that has not stopped the city of San Francisco, which has 0 patients so far, from activating its emergency operations center to centralize the response to any potential cases.
Fox's Trace Gallagher reports 5 people in the U.S. have been confirmed to have the coronavirus. They are all in medical isolation. It was over quickly. The crash that killed Kobe Bryant and his daughter and 7 other people on Sunday morning. Jennifer Hummondy of the National Transportation Safety Board on the last communication from the pilot.
The pilot advised they were climbing to avoid a cloud layer. When ATC asked what the pilot planned to do, there was no reply.
2 minutes later, 911 began receiving calls about a crash. Tributes continue. The Empire State Building illuminated in purple and yellow Monday evening, the colors of the LA Lakers. I'm Jack Callahan. This is Fox News.
Cocoa Coffee Company is now available at Circle K. Single-origin coffee beans, carefully sourced and locally roasted to give you the freshest cup of coffee Guam has to offer. Grab a cup that's brewed every 30 minutes or purchase a bag of the locally roasted whole beans. Flavors now serving: light medium roasted Ethiopia and medium dark roasted Jamaican Blue Mountain. Exclusively available at Circle K. With every Cocoa Coffee Company purchase, a portion of the proceeds will go towards the Cocoa Recovery Program.
Hafaday, I'm Governor Lou Leon Guerrero.
And I'm Lieutenant Governor Joshua Tenorio.
If you survived the Japanese occupation during World War II, filed a claim under the World War II Loyalty Recognition Act, and received a letter from the Foreign Claims Settlement Commission saying you are entitled to receive monetary compensation, then you may have an adjudicated claim.
Bring your claim letter and a valid government ID to our Guam War Claims Processing Center at the old Hakubotan Building in Tumon. Mooning, Mondays to Fridays from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m., and we will help you process your claim. If you have any questions or would like to know more, call us at 472-8931 or visit our website at warclaims.guam.gov.
Getting to this point wasn't easy, and our work isn't over. But we are now beginning to heal old wounds and honor our greatest generation. And we say to those still alive to hear it, your long wait is over.
Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie is brought to you by Bank Pacific, banking on the Pacific for 65 years.
So here we are, back again after that gigantic halftime show that we all like so much. The dancing girls, the cheerleaders, the synchronized card sections up in the grandstand, the drill team, the marching band, the sword swallower, the fire eater, the marchers carrying life-size placards of pictures of the real Joe Cruz. It just doesn't get any better than that. So that was the halftime show. That means we're now in the second half of Tall Tales. And I left off with that item on the card called Social Justice Warrior Mary Torres versus Private Property. And I read a little bit from an article on KUAM dealing with Bill 214, the Guam Safe Housing Act. And I have the act here, and I'll read it, and then I'll tell you how aggrieved I am by the legislature getting involved with private property to the extent that this bill does. This is a new Article 5, the Guam Safe Housing Act. If a tenant to a residential rental agreement or lease agreement notifies the landlord in writing, now here it is, that he or she, well, I don't know about that, real Joe Cruz. Could have said they.
Yep.
That he or she is the victim of family violence, sexual assault, or stalking as defined under Guam law, and provides to the landlord evidence as defined in 48501B, and the tenant seeks to vacate the premises due to fear of imminent danger for self or children because of family violence, sexual assault, or stalking, then the tenant may terminate the residential rental agreement or lease agreement and vacate the premises without further obligation as otherwise provided in 48501C. So let's say that I've got an apartment in up in Agana Heights. It's kind of a rough neighborhood, isn't it, real Joe Cruz?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, let's say that a person has an apartment up in Agana Heights, and he has someone, excuse me, I can't, I've got to be careful with my pronouns. So they, it's one person, they have a lease for an apartment for, let's say, for 5 years, right? But while they're living there, someone comes along and makes some affectionate moves towards them. But they reject them, and they get so angry at them that they began to push them around and hit them and slap them and things like that. Okay? They go to the police and turn in a police report and come back to the landlord and say, I want to move out of here because it's not safe. And the landlord says, you got a 5-year lease here. Or I would, once upon a time, I'd have said lady, but I can't say that now. You've got a 5-year lease here, person. And the reason that I gave you such a favorable rent is because it is a 5-year lease. I don't care. I want out of here, and I'm standing on my rights under the Guam Safe Housing Act. And away they go. Now, this domestic violence stuff is bad. I don't like it. If there were some way that I could have some effect on it, I would. Because it's not only bad for the people involved, but it's really tough on society because it's not a good environment for children. So domestic violence is a bad thing. So under what theory of government do we assign, or do we do some risk redistribution from the parties who are involved in domestic violence to an innocent landlord? Does that seem right? I mean, if I were a landlord, I ought to be able to rent to whomever I want, under whatever terms I want, with a few restrictions. I can't. There's something called a warranty of habitability, etc. So here we have the Guam legislature coming along and telling landlords, this is how you must conduct your affairs in your rental unit. So if you examine some of the economics of rental units, let's say apartments, rental apartments, there's nothing more perishable than a rental apartment. Somebody moves out on the first of the month, you're not making any money. You don't make any money until you rent that apartment to somebody else. If the apartment stands empty for a couple of months, you're probably losing a whole year's profit in the process. So what landlords are looking for is stable tenants. You don't want a lot of turnover, people in and out, vacant units, the transactional cost of finding a new tenant, etc. So under what social theory do we assign the risk of domestic violence to an innocent landlord who, as far as we know, is complying with all the laws, but if his tenant and somebody else get into it, he could have a financial loss? I'm just looking at it from the standpoint, that freedom is a person's ability to own property. If you can't own property, you're not free. That's the difference between socialism, communism, whatever, and capitalism. In a capitalist society, you get to own your own property, and you get to put it to such productive use as you want. And every time the state comes along and tells you how to use your capital property, it's going to cost you money. So this is classic social engineering here. We don't like domestic violence, so we're going to assign part of the problem to people that rent out apartments. Classic social justice warrior type legislation that I wouldn't be surprised to see coming from the likes of AOC, but I'm a little bit surprised to see coming from, well, I shouldn't be surprised, because this is not Mary Torres's first rodeo as far as social justice warrioring is concerned. She's also responsible for another bill that became law back, I think, in 2018. I have the bill here. It's the Fair Chances Hiring Process Act. Fair Chances Hiring Process Act. And this is how it works. If I were, or I'm not going to use myself for these examples. I'm just too, I'm so clean cut and so law abiding and such a nice guy that I know it interferes with people's thought processes when I try to use myself as the model here. People I can't get past their, Bob would never do that. That's not Bob. So let me just say, Mr. Schmo. Okay, Mr. Schmo commits armed robbery, beats a couple people up in the process, and does a dime at the Department of Corrections. So when he gets out of the Department of Corrections, he wants to find a job. Maybe he does, maybe he doesn't, but XYZ Corporation is hiring people. So under this Fair Employment Practices or Fair Chances Hiring Process Act, an employer can no longer, a prospective employer can no longer say, bring your police clearance and court clearance when you come in and file an application. You can't ask for those two things at the application stage. And I'll talk a little bit more about that after I make my point. So Mr. Schmo comes in and fills out the forms, etc. And let's say he's applying for a job as a greenskeeper, bush cutting, mowing the grass, etc., etc., etc. The employer can't ask him about the prospective employer can't say, have you ever been in jail? Have you ever robbed it? You can't ask anything like that. So the employer then can make a conditional job offer. And after he's made the conditional job offer, he can then tell the Mr. Schmo, bring in your court clearance and your police clearance. I want to see them. And the employer looks at that and he says, no, I don't want this guy out, mowing lawns and things like that for people that I know, because they're going to figure they're not safe having this guy who's done 10 years in the Department of Corrections hanging around their property. So I'm not going to offer him a job. If the employer says, Mr. Schmo, I'm not going to offer you a job, and these are the reasons, then Mr. Schmo can go make a complaint at the Fair Employment Practice Office at the Department of Labor, which will then conduct an investigation, and based on those facts is going to find that the employer broke the law and could wind up fining the employer $1,000. What the employer would have to do to show that he is within the confines of the law, he would have to come up with written findings saying, I'm not going to employ you for good business reasons, and these are my business reasons. And he lays them out and gives them to Mr. Schmo. Mr. Schmo, if he's not satisfied, he can take that down to the Fair Employment Practice Office, and they'll do their complete investigation. Now, stop right here. Let's say that the Fair Employment Investigation, the Fair Employment Process Office does a fair investigation, and the employer is held blameless. There's something called transaction costs, and that is that the Fair Employment Practice Office is going to ask Mr. Schmo for every single piece of paper in his office for the last 5 years, going all the way back to his grandma's recipe for oatmeal cookies. And Mr. Schmo, the employer is going to spend a lot of time and money rounding up these papers. So the old saying is, the process is the punishment. The law really arms the employee, because he can make these demands on the employer. Employers don't have a whole whole lot of time to be sifting through all of these things and knowing the life history of everyone who comes and applies for a job. Once again, now the theory here is, well, you know, if people don't find jobs when they get out of prison, maybe they'll just reoffend and go back. I can understand that, but do we assign the burden of rehabilitating people who have been in jail to employers? Once again, employers in business to make money. Employers don't go into business to become social justice warriors, and that's what you're forcing an employer to do, to become a social justice warrior, or else don't hire anybody at all. And I've made the statement more than once, if you are a sole proprietor and you're doing okay, unless you're into some ultra-hazardous activity like handling hazardous materials or dynamite or something like that, from a liability standpoint, the most dangerous thing you can do is hire somebody. Because when you become an employer, the law is full of traps for the unwary. This is just one more. Now, fortunately, there's a threshold, so small companies can avoid this. And if I were advising anybody, I would say don't hire beyond the threshold, because this thing could really bite you and bite you hard. Now, looking at the purpose of the thing, I'm all for trying to rehabilitate people that have been in prison and trying to help them make something of their lives. We have social organizations that can help with that, churches, voluntary associations. And I heard Ray the other day talking about the late Lee Holmes, may he rest in peace, who would go out of his way to hire ex-cons, and he got very good performance out of them. Well, if that's what he wants to do, I take my hat off to him and I say, fine. And I know Monty McDowell does the same thing over at Advanced Management. Advanced Management's a really good company. It's a well-run company. So I take my hat off to Monty. But where does the government get off forcing people to do these things? Forcing people to go through this song and dance to reject somebody, to reject, let's say we're dealing with a child molester, right? And the child molester, this child molester was targeting, just like this guy that got 20 years in the clink, targeting kids as young as 3 years old. And he wants to apply for a job as a greenskeeper with your company. And, he comes in and he says, there aren't going to be any kids out there in the grass, that I'm mowing. I won't hit them with my bush cutter. What does that do for your company? People are going to say, I'm not hiring those guys. I'm getting rid of those guys. They're not going to maintain my house and my yard anymore. Do you know who they sent over here the other day? Where does the government get off imposing this on other people? And the answer is nowhere. It's the reason that a good conservative abhors statism. That is the state getting in people, everybody's knickers, the state telling everybody what they must do, letting you know what's virtuous and forcing you to do what somebody thinks is virtuous, like rehabilitating prisoners or allowing people with leases out of their leases under certain circumstances that have no economic background at all. So that's exactly what you'd expect from a social justice warrior. So that's why I call this Mary Torres, the social justice warrior against private property or private enterprise. And I suppose that given the lack of perspicuity that we find in our current legislature, that this bill of Mary's will pass, and it's always the same thing. Like Governor Leon Guerrero, what you're doing here is you're risking public money, making these advanced payments, and we could all be in the tank if 1365 doesn't pass. What do you say to that? I'm doing it for the Manamku. Whatever it takes, I will do it for the Manamku. Or, Mary Torres, why did you introduce that bill, or why did you get that law passed that forces ex-cons on unwitting employers? Well, I think that society would be assisted if we help these people find work, and I feel so bad for them, not being able to find work. Or, we've got to do, these women that are subject to this domestic violence, I've got to help them. So if you've got a good emotional reason that you could advance as to why you're doing something that's so dictatorial and so wrong, and a lot of times you're going to get away with it. People will give you a pass. Not here in Tall Tales, however. Okay, so that's Mary Justice, the social justice warrior Mary Torres versus private property. The next thing I've got on the card here is, I hope I got it on the card. Give me a minute here, Real Joe Cruz. Yeah, here it is. Yeah, this is Wayne Pacell versus Chelsea Munier-Brecht and Rudy Paco. And the latest item here is from today's Post. Animal right group warns of civil and criminal action if Guam knowingly sanctions and continues importing birds for cockfighting. The government could face civil or criminal penalties, according to Animal Wellness Action President Wayne Pacell. Now, it isn't going to be Guam that suffers the criminal penalties. You can't lock the government of Guam up in a jail cell. Civil penalties, maybe, but more than likely that would go to individuals also. So Pacell, in a follow-up letter to Department of Agriculture I got to keep rewriting this. In a follow-up letter to Director of Agriculture, Chelsea Munier-Brecht, Pacell asked the director to reconsider a decision not to institute new protocols to prevent the illegal shipment of fighting birds to Guam. We know the identities of the major exporters and importers, and you can readily deny their birds entry based on the body of evidence we are providing, wrote Pacell. The top 5 individual shippers accounted for 52% of the shipments to Guam during the period for which we obtained documents. Adelup maintains that the Department of Agriculture was and is currently following all applicable federal and local laws. Well, you'll see a little later on that that's just not the case. Well, Governor Lilian Guerrero said Guam must adhere to the ban. The local budget law makes enforcement of the ban the lowest priority of Gov Guam, meaning, in effect, that it won't be locally enforced. Now, you have to give the Post, which does a pretty good job most of the time, you got to give them the gullibility award here. That does the language in the budget means no such thing. Okay, let's stop here for the 7th inning stretch, and then we'll come back to cockfighting.
The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts of Guam Training.
Customer service isn't rocket science, but sometimes you need patience that's otherworldly to get through the day. I'm Jerry Roberts, and at 7:20 a.m. on The Ray Gibson Show, we'll tell a few stories where the service was on the unique side.
You can find daily transcripts of The Extra Point at GuamTraining.com. Tune in every weekday morning at 7:20 for The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts. Brought to you by Guahan Insurance Services and First Hawaiian Bank on 93.3 The Point.
Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie is brought to you by Mescla. Mescla Restaurant in Agotya is closed for improvements and will reopen on February 2nd. You can still get all your favorites at Mescla Bistro in Tumon on the first floor of the Grand Plaza Hotel. Favorites like SoCal-style 2-pound surf and turf burrito, tasty strips of certified Angus beef, and succulent shrimp rolled into a flour tortilla. With red rice, guacamole, cilantro lime, sour cream sauce, salsa fresca, and cheese, served with a spicy roasted chili salsa for only $17.95. Try it today, available in Tumon at the Grand Plaza Hotel. For reservations, please call 969-2652.
So here we are, Wrigley Field, Chicago, center field bleachers. And I noticed from Facebook that Mike King is enjoying the show from Germany, just part of our international radio listening audience. And I think they play baseball in Germany also. Okay, so before I go back here to the animal rights group, I've got to pick up a call from a relatively regular caller here named Our Carl. Good afternoon, Our Carl.
Hey, Bob. Good afternoon.
Sir.
Yeah, I was listening to your conversation, if you wouldn't mind backtracking about Mary Torres' bill. And, you want
me to backtrack, Carl?
Yeah, I think you'd already gone.
All right, here goes.
Oh, yeah.
It's kind of hard to understand when I read it backwards, but go ahead.
Yeah. I thought of a quote by one of our favorite economists and social philosophers, Thomas Sowell, that applies to that. It goes, "It is hard to imagine a more stupid or more dangerous way of making decisions than by putting those decisions in the hands of people who pay no price for being wrong." So they're going to force, and I'm all for turnaround stories. I love overcomers and things like that. But what I'm not for is for the government putting a gun to employers' heads and telling them, to make us feel good so we can virtue signal, you better do this. Because what happens if these, there are some people like Mr. Holmes, Lee Holmes, who did it, and all the credit and power to him, but he knew what he was getting into. He wasn't being forced. He just felt it was the right thing to do. So some people are going to hire some people, and it's not going to work out. There might be issues that pop up. If someone may get hurt. So can the employer turn around and sue? Or can the customer that maybe was affected?
Well, there are some theoretical protections in the Act, but of course you can sue anybody for anything, and once again, the transactional cost could be enormous. And of course, if the employer hires someone and that someone happens to steal from the employer, there's no recovery there at all.
Yeah, exactly. I'll give one classic example of this kind of what Thomas Sowell calls stage one thinking. Proposing bills and just looking at the first stage and just totally disregarding what happens after that. One example is the legislation that has come through Congress, or I think it was in California specifically that I'm thinking of, where they forced car manufacturers, and it may have been at the national level too, they forced car manufacturers for mileage purposes. You know, they set these very stringent mileage requirements the cars had to meet in order to go on their roads legally. So, of course, the car makers did what they could to comply, and one of the things they did to comply with these stringent mileage requirements is they cut the amount of metal in the cars. So that's one reason why we have ended up over time with tuna cans on wheels. So the people that sponsored these bills and pushed them through and forced the car makers to comply with these extremely hard mileage requirements, they're not going to be driving tuna cans on wheels and tin cans. They're going to be driving SUVs. Their families are going to be well protected in SUVs, and if there's an accident, they're most likely going to survive. One of the key protections for people who are in accidents is being in a car that has a lot of metal in it. Who wants to be in a light, car with thin metal with your family if you're in an accident? Given the choice, I want to be in an SUV or something as heavy as possible. So that's one example that comes to mind. With legislation, the legislators feeling very morally superior.
Yeah, well, what you're talking about are the cafe regulations in California.
Yes, exactly.
And of course, those who shepherd that kind of legislation through the legislature are able to say, I'm really fighting global warming. Look what I did. By increasing these mileage standards, we've reduced the amount of carbon dioxide in the air by 3 thimblefuls every day. I'm a wonderful person, right?
Yes, and they just totally ignore the casualties left behind, hundreds of people who have died because the cars were made with thinner metal and less weight that have gone up against SUVs or, larger vehicles and have lost in this head-to-head match, So these people in Washington, D.C. Push these big kind of bills through. They don't have to comply with them. They are living in gated communities and driving heavy SUVs. Their families, they make sure they're protected. So I just, find it ironic, that...
Well, there's a mindset here, Carl. And the mindset, the social justice warrior mindset, is that the statist government has to make the right decisions so that people will do the right thing. We can never let people just go on about their business. We have to engineer them. So going back again to people who did time in prison and are looking for a job, we can't depend on people doing, being in business and making business decisions to run their businesses. We have to inject that social justice warrior dimension and make it very difficult for them, and in effect arm people that come out of the College of Con Men out in Manila, the largest concentration of con men on not only the island, probably anywhere in this part of the world. So as people get better at this, we can expect more people to get out of prison, apply for jobs, and game this whole system that Mary Torres put in place. That'll be the ultimate result.
There are ways that they could come up with to incentivize it. Taking, in effect, a gun and putting it to the head of the employer and telling them, if you don't comply, we're going to fine you, and if you resist, we're going to throw you in jail.
Yeah.
That is not. That's a negative incentive. That's for sure.
So when you come,
there are better ways to do it that involve
Well,
encouraging people freely to make the, do things. That's not the way to do it.
Is that even a function of the government? I keep coming back to what I want to see. I want to see an effective, efficient government operating within the rule of law, providing basic government services. I don't expect the government to be the great problem solver for individuals with problems, whether it's domestic violence or a prison record or whatever. I don't see that as the role of government. But if you were to ask, when people start turning in their papers and start running, we see a new field of candidates, I'll bet you dollars to donuts. If you got all of them in a room and said, get out a piece of paper and a pencil, and now I want you to write down on that piece of paper what it is that causes you to run for this legislature. I would bet you dollars to donuts that I could tell you just exactly what they're going to write. I want to do good for the people of Guam, right? You never find anybody who says, the hell with the people of Guam. I'm going to go in there and do good for myself. But the problem is, what is it that is good for the people? And for me, what's good for the people is that government that provides basic government services. Cops on the street, fire department, pretty good schools, someplace to go when you're sick, and that's it. We don't have to be remaking the people that live here in order for this to be a good community. And that's
well, I like to point out when government comes up with legislation, ways that the very legislation that they're passing is harming the people that they say they're trying to help. And one huge example I can think of is the welfare state that was vastly expanded starting in the 60s. And most of the, the metrics for, social measures such as divorce and murder and having two-parent marriages and all these metrics were headed in positive directions in the inner cities. And then once the 60s started, they all reversed. And that's no coincidence. What is it they say that, that because things happen at the same time, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're the cause.
Yeah, correlation doesn't equal causation.
Yeah, but in this case, it's just massive reversal of all these serious measures, of social things like having two-parent families and marriages and employment and, all these various things. It's no coincidence that they all happened to reverse in the 60s. So I like to point out what the government's own legislation has caused has damaged the very people they claim to want to help. And in this case, it's happening here on Guam. The social problems we're seeing because of the disintegration of the family. A lot of it caused by government policies. Anyway, Bob, I just wanted to weigh in and thank you for allowing me a few minutes to weigh in on the issue. I appreciate it.
Well, you are, after all, our Carl, aren't you?
Yeah, I try to be.
All right, see you later, Carl.
Okay, Bob.
Yeah, so enough about social justice warriors. And we're going to turn now, get your Law and Order notebook out. I'm going to turn our attention to the Civil Service Commission. And by way of background, I have maintained this for several years, that the deck is so stacked against management at the Civil Service Commission and in favor of the employee that employee, if you're going to be a betting man, bet on the employee to prevail. For one thing, management has to prove its case by clear and convincing evidence, not a preponderance of the evidence, but clear and convincing evidence. For another, even if management proves its case by clear and convincing evidence, the Civil Service Commission on many, many occasions says, yeah, you proved your case, but firing them was too severe of a punishment. So we're changing the termination into the only other thing we can turn it into, a 30-day suspension. So you wind up paying 3 years back pay. You don't have to pay for that 30 days because the Civil Service Commission commissioners substituted their own judgment for that of the director of the agency with no standards to guide them whatsoever. It's what I call the warm tummy, tight anal sphincter test. They look at the penalties that management imposes, and if it makes their tummy feel warm, it's good. If it tightens their anal sphincter, then it's bad. So that we start out that way. And then so often we have commissioners that bend over backwards to find for the employee. The most recent case here was the matter of Priscilla Tuncap, when the commission voted 3-1 to sustain the Civil Service Commission on one of the Port 7. And Priscilla Tuncap did not vote in favor of it. And so, you know, the thing, I think that it takes a majority to either sustain or reject. But anyhow, Priscilla Tuncap didn't go along with the other three. She may have had good reasons. She may have had bad reasons. She may have had no reason at all other than what you hear so often. Well, you know, those people have mortgages and families and whatever. So here's another example, again, of the of not the commissioners, but the bureaucracy bending over backwards for the employee. And this is a story that ran in the Post yesterday. 2 more port termination cases involving Vivian Castro-Leon and Bernadette Stern-Mano are once again on the horizon for the Civil Service Commission. The parties met Thursday before Civil Service Commission Administrative Law Judge Eric Miller for a status conference. It was a workers' compensation claim that led not only to Mano's termination from the port in 2012, but the termination of several other employees. The cases have gone from the court, from CSC to the courts and back. Miller, in turn, Miller inherited the Leon and Mano cases from former administrative law judge R. Todd Thompson. According to a December 2019 letter from the commission, Thompson's contract with the CSC expired on September 30, 2018. However, his services were not terminated until December 20, 2019. Ignacio Agagui, representing Leon, asked for permission to renew the requests and to have Miller review the motions and come to his own conclusions. He argued that Thompson's decisions are void because they were made after his CSC contract had expired. One of the motions is a request to dismiss Leon's termination for violation of the former 60-day rule, which required management to turn in a final adverse action within 60 days of knowing about allegations against employees. Miller said Thompson was appointed by the commission to serve as administrative law judge until he was removed, and he believes Thompson's actions as administrative law judge, were lawful and enforceable. End of story, right? So once again, we have an employee here named Leon. Leon went before the administrative law judge named Thompson. Thompson dismissed ruled against Leon on a 60-day motion. Leon's lawyer then comes along and says, you know, Thompson's decision doesn't count because his contract had expired when he made that decision. Okay, I'll pick this up and we'll maybe take this one right on down the home stretch.
Everyone has a busy schedule these days, and sometimes we forget to schedule our routine dental checkup and cleaning. Don't neglect your dental health. Schedule one today with Dr. Robert Yang and his Smile Team, conveniently located at the East West Business Center on Marine Drive, Upper Tumon. Call us today at 647-8702 or 3. Again, that's 647-8702 or 647-8703. We make smiles happen.
Talk Tales with Bob Klitzkie is brought to you by Bank Pacific, banking on the Pacific for 65 years.
Okay, so here we are, Churchill Downs, Louisville, Kentucky. The home stretch on Tall Tales. That means I've got about 8 more minutes to wrap up another educational, exciting, elucidating episode of Tall Tales. And before we broke, I was talking about the Civil Service Commission and a case involving a person named Leon. So, repeating again, just for clarity, Leon made a motion to have her termination revoked based on the so-called 60-day rule. The administrative law judge, Todd Thompson, decided against Leon and said, no, you're not going to win on that basis. The attorney for Leon, Ike Aggie, now comes before the new administrative law judge, whose name is Eric Miller, and says to Eric Miller, the decision that Todd made is void because Todd Thompson's contract had expired at the time he made the decision. Miller said, no, that's not correct, because Thompson's contract said he could stay on until he was terminated by the commission. So his decision is good. End of story, right? Why would we go any farther than that? And then the story goes on to say this. However, Miller did agree to review the motions. Well, what on earth for? Why? He asked for 2 weeks to issue his recommendations. If the case is still alive, then we'll have to settle for a hearing on the merits very shortly thereafter. Miller said Mano's case was about to be heard by Thompson prior to his termination. Miller scheduled that hearing for March. Mano was present for a hearing, Leon was, etc. So anyhow, once Miller said, no, Thompson's decision is good, that was it. And that's why you have to have your Law and Order notebook handy. Because there's an extremely important concept in the law called res judicata. Okay, now when race is R-E-S, it's not like a 10K race or something like that, Real Joe Cruz. That's probably what you thought it was, right? Huh?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. All right, so res judicata. Res is the Latin word for thing. Judicata is the Latin way of saying decided. So res judicata means the thing decided. And generally, under the doctrine of res judicata, if a matter is decided, you don't go back and decide it again. And according to this article, there isn't any reason for Miller to go back and decide it again. Unless he thinks, well, maybe if I look at it, I can figure out some way to rule opposite of what Thompson did. Maybe Miller thinks this would be a good opportunity for me to reach out.
Yes, sir.
To Leon.
Reach out.
Give her the benefit of the doubt. It just makes absolutely no sense to go back. You know, if he had ruled the other way and said, no, once his contract expired, he didn't have the authority to make the decision, then I could understand it. But once he said, no, the decision is good, without explaining why he wants to go back and review it again, take 2 weeks. Yeah, something needs to be done with the Civil Service Commission. At this point, I'm not quite sure exactly what does need to be done. I, for years, had thought that having an administrative law judge would be a great improvement at the Civil Service Commission, because it would speed things up so much. When you have all 7 commissioners there, the hearings can really drag on, because if there is one really important question that has to be answered in order to decide the case, guess how many times that question will be asked, Real Joe Cruz?
How many, sir?
7, because there are 7 commissioners, right? Things can really drag on. And so often the commissioners, not being law trained, are able to miss important points of the case that we would hope that a lawyer acting as a hearing officer or administrative law judge wouldn't miss. So I thought that in the interest of economy, we could move the cases a lot faster, do a much better job of having the administrative law judge do the hearings, issue findings of fact and conclusions of law, give that to the Civil Service Commission, to the commissioners, however many there are, hoping that there's more than 4. And the commission then could then say, yes, we're going to affirm the decision of the hearing officer, or no, the administrative law judge made a mistake, or whatever. Just a much more expeditious and potentially correct process than hearing all those cases before the Civil Service Commissioners. Now, one of the roadblocks to actually having administrative law judges do this is that commissioners were getting paid $50 a hearing. And unlike other boards and commissions, there was no cap. So if you met every Tuesday and Thursday for a whole month, you could bring in a few $100 at the end of the month. So why would you want an administrative law judge to do the heavy lifting and cut you out of that money? So that's where we are. And I was so disappointed when I read this, obviously based on this particular case, but also that what I thought was a good idea maybe isn't such a good idea after all. Okay, that's Eric Miller versus the doctrine of res judicata. Next, I've got Pedo versus the Post. What have I got? 2 minutes to go, Real Joe Cruz?
You got about a minute, sir.
About a minute. I probably ought to save Pedo versus the Post until Monday. Monday.
As you wish, sir.
Tomorrow's not Monday, right?
Tomorrow's Wednesday, sir.
Tomorrow, all day long?
I believe so.
Yeah. But it won't be Wednesday in the States, will it?
No, sir.
Yeah, I didn't think so. What time is it in the States right now, Real Joe Cruz?
I think it depends on what part of the States you're in, sir.
In Texas.
Right now in Texas, it's probably 2 a.m.
Well, let's see, in California, it's just about midnight.
Yeah, so I think maybe 2 a.m.
Yeah,
Texas.
just about 2 a.m. in Texas. So all of my international radio listening audience located in Texas, we're signing off. We'll be back tomorrow with Pedo versus the Post. Been an extremely enjoyable show, even though the Real Joe Cruz screwed up the Facebook at the beginning of the show. He won't do that again tomorrow, will you, Real Joe Cruz?
No, sir.
Yeah. Hear that? Okay. Good night, everybody.